1974.
This is NBC Nightly News, Wednesday, October 17th. Reported by John Chancellor.
Good evening. The Middle East war produced developments all over the world today. The oil-producing countries of the Arab world decided to use their oil as a political weapon. They will reduce oil production by 5% a month until the Israelis withdraw from occupied territories. If the Arab countries keep that pledge, it would reduce their production by almost 50% in 1 year. There were diplomatic maneuvers at the United Nations, in Washington, and in Cairo. And there is a savage and possibly decisive tank battle raging in the Sinai.
OPEC brought about an oil embargo in 1974 because they were very upset with the United States for supplying the Israeli troops during the Yom Kippur War, and eventually that also affected the peace negotiations. And people were worried about the high gas prices, as they should have been, not only here but worldwide.
In fact, it got so bad that the United States had to ration gasoline.
Every day, refineries in the United States rely on 26 million gallons of crude oil from the Middle East to keep operating at full capacity. That is only 5 or 6% of our daily fuel needs, but if in the months to come the Arabs cut it off gradually, as they threaten, by next summer the shortage will be far more serious than it was this past summer.
But thank goodness we had Henry Kissinger in office at that time, and he was able to negotiate a treaty, and OPEC felt like this was going to work, and it did. And so finally, towards the end of 1974 and into 1975, they ended the oil embargo, and we were all very happy.
The president comes along and he declares that there's going to be a national change in the speed limit to 55 miles an hour, and people were not happy. Some of the roads you drove 65, even 70 on. I think the interstate in Arkansas at one time was 75 miles an hour, and then all at once everybody was driving 55 miles an hour. The law enforcement people were vigorously and rigorously enforcing this. People were getting tickets for going 56 miles an hour because they were trying to create this new law, this new obedience to it in order to conserve gasoline. It was wildly unpopular, and it amazed me that it stayed in force so long before it was finally lifted. But overall, I don't recall any person that was in favor of this or that appreciated it. It was an unpopular law.
The Terracotta Army, which was buried in northern China to protect the emperor on his journey from the Middle Kingdom upward to heaven, has turned out to be an extraordinary archaeological discovery. The army consists of life-size soldiers, each individually molded, with individual faces and individual armor, giving an idea both of the ethnicity of the Chinese warriors as well as the armament used in the period of the first emperors. The army is still being excavated. The number of soldiers is at least 7,000. It is a fabulous find, and it is a fabulous example of the magnificence of the emperor and his sense of his own place in the world and in the world to come. It will be, I suspect, a World Tourism Site and a World Heritage Site sanctioned by the United Nations. And Lord knows it will be an enormous tourist site in China.
Spiro Agnew's resignation wasn't really a shock to the rest of the world, even though he was only the second vice president in history, I believe, to be made to resign. But that was only part of the culmination, and eventually, of course, Nixon would resign, even though he fought it a great deal more than Spiro Agnew. Spiro Agnew was not a bad man. He made some bad choices, and he was one of those men that people just like to make fun of for some reason. And he played along with it, but his resignation was really a sorrow, not only personally, but for our country. But the one good thing that I do need to say for him is that he could have made a lot of money after his resignation, but he chose to give all of his profits to the POW families because he wanted to help them in any way that he could.
The student now goes to college to proclaim rather than to learn. The lessons of the past are ignored and obliterated in a contemporary antagonism known as the generation gap. A spirit of national masochism prevails, encouraged by an effete core of impudent snobs who characterize themselves as intellectuals. The law-abiding American who believes in his country needs a strong voice to articulate his dissatisfaction with those who seek to destroy our heritage of liberty and our system of justice, to penetrate the cacophony of seditious drivel emanating from the best publicized clowns in our society and their fans in the Fourth Estate.
Spiro Agnew never did strike me as being an upstanding citizen, simply because he was associated with Richard Nixon, and Richard Nixon was a crook and didn't hide it. And so when Spiro Agnew had to resign, I wasn't really surprised by the whole thing. And he was replaced by Gerald Ford. And then Richard Nixon resigned, and so it just seemed, I don't know, kind of poetic justice that the president had a rather shady vice president, and they both ended up resigning.
And so tonight, to you, the great silent majority of my fellow Americans, I ask for your support. I pledged in my campaign for the presidency to end the war in a way that we could win the peace. I have initiated a plan of action which will enable me to keep that pledge. The more support I can have from the American people, the sooner that pledge can be redeemed. For the more divided we are at home, the less likely the enemy is to negotiate at Paris.
Okay, so people were hearing things on the news about this break-in at the Watergate complex, and that the Republicans were involved, and that eventually the president was involved. And then it came out that there were these tapes that Nixon had recorded all this information in the White House, and that there were recordings of the that implicated him in the break-in, and people were pretty amazed. And people were even more amazed that he didn't destroy the tapes.
Throughout the long and difficult period of Watergate, I have felt it was my duty to persevere, to make every possible effort to complete the term of office to which you elected me. In the past few days, however, it has become evident to me that I no longer have a strong enough political base in the Congress to justify continuing that effort. I now believe that the constitutional purpose has been served, and there is no longer a need for the process to be prolonged.
Everybody kept thinking and joking, if I had those tapes would disappear. And so Eventually that just built up until Nixon resigned from office, and I remember listening to the radio and they were saying President Nixon had resigned and he was boarding a helicopter and leaving the White House.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
The Rubik's Cube was invented by Erno Rubik
understood that
in
it was
1974.
The creation of someone from Central Europe somewhere, Yugoslavia or Hungary or some distant place such as that, and that when I tried it, I was absolutely unable to work it. In fact, I have never been able to figure out how you could twist and turn the different squares so that one time you could turn it this way and then you could turn it that way. It seemed to me like somehow there was magic working on the inside of it. I've never understood the engineering of it, nor could I ever line up in some fashion all the different colors in the way they're supposed to be.
It came out when I was a junior in college, and it was a fad kind of thing, and everybody had them, and I never saw the point of having a Rubik's Cube. I mean, it was a curiosity, and people would be sitting in the middle of a lecture class playing with their Rubik's Cube, and I just never saw any of the fascination for the Rubik's Cube. I mean, it was kind of neat when people used to get them all one color on one side, and you know, but that's about it. It seems kind of pointless to me to have one.